So welcome to the biggest intercession course in the history of Johns Hopkins. I don't actually know if that's true. I just made it up, but it sounded really good. I'm going to be teaching you guys a lot about bluffing, and that was my first attempt. But it's possible that it's true. So I had this crazy idea. I am a pretty fanatical about my poker. It's my biggest hobby. And I said, I should teach a course in intercession about poker. And I thought maybe I'll get like 20 people will show up. And so they asked me for a cap, and I said 100 students. You know, let's just put the cap way up here. And then the day registration opened, we had 50 people on the wait list and 100 in the class. So I knew we had to make an adjustment. And I'm super excited that we have 230 registered students for this class. It's not at all what I expected, but I think that we can handle it. So let me just tell you a little bit about how this came to be and introduce myself. I'm Avi Rubin, obviously, and I'm a professor in the computer science department. And I've been here at Hopkins on the faculty for 18 years. Before that, I spent 9 years in industry research labs at AT&T and Belcor. And about 15 years ago, I became really interested in poker, and not just playing poker, but studying the game, understanding it, and then playing competitively. And I got into it because my brother was teasing me about how bad a poker player I was, and he suggested that I read this book on poker. And I'm like, why would you read a book on poker? Poker's just something fun you play with your friends. And he said, no, read this book. And I read it, and I said, wow, there's a lot of science here. And now I've since read over 20 books. I've studied them. And for like the last 10 years, my family's been getting really sick and tired of me talking about how I should teach an intercession course on poker. And so now I have a daughter who's a junior here at Hopkins. And I knew it's almost my last chance for me to teach an intercession course that she could take, because she's a writing seminars major and I'm computer science, and she wouldn't really take any of my other classes that I would offer. And so I finally, with her being able to take the class, I said, okay, I'm going to get off my butt and do it. And I've spent the last several months preparing for this course and making up lecture slides, etc. Now, my daughter was a little concerned that at some point in the semester or in the intersession, I would do something that would really embarrass her, which is, I think, a legitimate concern if you're a kid and your father's teaching there. So I thought, let's just get that out of the way right now. Let me do that, and then she doesn't have to worry anymore. So starting out, that's Ilana. You might recognize her. She's in the room right now. And the story I'm going to tell that's going to embarrass Ilana is that imagine that you're a dad with 3 young kids and you're really into poker. What is it that you teach your kids? Poker, right? So I taught my kids poker at a very young age, and we used to have these intense poker games with like my 5-year-old twins and 8-year-old Ilana sitting around the table with sunglasses and hoodies, and we're like playing poker. And Ilana had a particular move which she denies, but which I swear she used to do. She'd have her sunglasses up here like this, and whenever she'd get a really good hand, they came down. Get real quiet and serious. So I'm like, okay, Ilana's got a good hand now. So one time I knew she had a strong hand, and I put out a bet, and she folded. I'm like, that's interesting. I really wonder, because maybe my tell is a little off, and she wasn't strong. I said, what'd you have? And I looked at her cards, and she had folded a full house. I'm like, what were you doing? And she said, I was bluffing. Okay, bluffing is deception. I'll give you that. But the bluff fold is not a move that we're going to teach in this class. Okay, so I want to get to know you guys a little bit before we get started. And so I want to see, just by show of hands, how many of you have never played poker before? Okay, a few people. And I should tell you that I geared this course towards you guys, because the people that have played, there'll be some things that you know, but I want everyone, even if you've never played before, to be able to take this class. How many of you have played poker before? This should be everybody else. I can't think of a third category. Okay, how many play regularly? And by that I mean like at least once a month you try to play poker. All right. How many of you have played in a casino? I know most of you probably aren't old enough, but maybe internationally. Okay. How many of you understand the concept of pot odds? High up so I can see. Okay. How about know what it means for your hand to be counterfeited? Like 4 people, including my 2 course assistants. Can figure out side pots. Okay, a little more. Have won more than $3,000 in a poker tournament. Okay, well, the next question will then be answered. And finally, I was looking for a replacement for myself for this course, but if no one raises their hand, then I'll assume no one has won $1 million in poker here. So let me tell you about my goals for the course. One is to have a basic understanding of the theory of poker. Poker is actually very complex, very involved, and I do believe, and maybe someday, I could teach a full semester course in applied math and statistics on poker, and there will be plenty of stuff left to cover. But I want to give you a basic understanding, and also to know how to apply the theory. It's one thing to understand a theory, but in order to apply it, you actually have to experience it. But poker obviously is fun. If you're just sitting around solving formulas, you're not going to enjoy yourselves, and I want to make sure you enjoy poker. And the way that I enjoy poker is by winning, right? So I want to teach you how to win. I'm going to give you an appreciation for the history of poker. So from time to time, when I'm teaching a concept, I'm going to stop and I'm going to talk about some famous pro who's known for that concept and maybe show you like a 2 or 3 minute video clip of that person that's relevant. Finally, we're going to have hands-on experience playing poker. Actually, we decided not to use PokerStars. I'll show you the site we'll be using in a minute. But part of this course is going to be playing poker with your classmates. And I hope we all have a great intersession. I think it's going to be. I chose this picture here of John Gorsuch because just to give you an idea of how fun poker can be. John is a friend of mine. He's in my poker group and we talk all the time. And he, this summer at the World Series of Poker, he won a bracelet. So the World Series of Poker is a series of tournaments that takes place every summer for about 5 to 6 weeks. Each of the tournaments lasts 3 to 5 days. And then there's the main event, which is the one that's on ESPN, and it lasts 8 days, and you win like $10 million. Each of those tournaments is called a bracelet event because the winner will get a bracelet in addition to some money. So last summer, there was an event called the Millionaire Maker. And the Millionaire Maker is just like it sounded, guaranteed $1 million to first place. And they got so many people that bought into it that first place was $1.34 million, and John won it. He got first place in it. He also, about 2 days before it ended, was very, very, very low in chips. He was kind of what we call on fumes. He wasn't doing very well. And then he made a comeback and he won the tournament. And he quit his job and now he goes around on the circuit and plays professionally. And the last update I got from him, he just cashed at a tournament in Montreal. So he's a great poker player, and we're going to talk about some of the famous people in this class. So I also wanted to give credit and show you some of the books that I used in preparing this course. So a lot of the course is going to be walking through hand examples. Some of the hand examples that we're going to go through are hands that I played, but most of them are hands that I found in books that I find very pedagogical and very interesting to look at the hand, what happened in the hand. And the primary book that I used is this one in the top left here. Whoops, let's see. Cash Games by Harrington. It's a 3-volume set, and that is the book that I got from my brother that started me on poker and kind of learning how to play the game. My second favorite book here is the middle one in the top row. It's a lot more advanced, but it's got some really good concepts, and I think it's a must-read for someone that wants to get serious. Now let me talk to you for a minute about getting serious. I'm hoping that most of you, I'm guessing over 90%, this is a fun exposure class. You don't know that much about poker. It's kind of gets a lot of attention on TV and a lot of people play it and you want to see how cool it is and learn a bunch about it. And that's great. That's what I'm hoping you'll get out of it. But there'll be a few of you that get the bug that I have, and you're going to become serious about poker. And the first thing I want to tell you is that if you ever win the main event, just remember your professor who taught you about this. The second thing is if you find yourself broke, homeless, and stealing money to buy into your next tournament, don't blame me. I'm not trying to get you guys hooked on something that's addictive. It's just, I find it to be a really fun thing to do. So let me give you the outline of the course. First thing we're going to do, and we'll cover all of this today, is how to play the game. What are the mechanics? How does poker work? Mostly Texas Holdem. And I'm going to focus on cash games. As you're going to learn in a minute, Poker, and in particular Texas Hold'em, has two kinds of games you can play: cash games and tournaments. And we will be playing tournaments, and we will be learning a bunch about tournaments, but the primary focus of the theory is going to be on cash games. And the reason is that cash games are much more interesting, and they require a lot more skill. And I will even give you a short, easy to understand mathematical proof later on in the course that cash games require more skill than tournaments. And that's not tongue-in-cheek, I really will show you that. Then we'll cover the fundamentals. And the fundamentals, I think, will take about 2.5 days. So I'll start it today, and the next 2 lectures we're going to be learning fundamentals. After that, we're going to learn very Hold'em-specific things. Each one of these, I think, is about a day, maybe a little less than a day lecture. So how to play pre-flop. Pre-flop is when you first get your cards and nothing has happened yet. How to play on the flop is another one. And then a whole section on how to play on the turn. And for each one of these, we're going to look at hands and decisions where the key decision happened at that point. So like when we're looking at turn, we're going to look at a hand where the key decision happened on the turn. If you don't know what the turn is, you will in a minute. I'm going to go through everything from a total beginner standpoint. We're going to look at the river play. So once I finished covering pre-flop, flop, turn, river, then I'm going to turn to some advanced concepts, different moves like the squeeze move, if those of you have heard of it, and a bunch of floating, all these other different moves that you can make in poker and how to defend against them as well. Finally, we're going to talk about tournaments, and we're going to play some tournaments, and I'll get into that in a second. Poker etiquette is a big deal. If any of you play golf, you know that if you bring someone out on the golf course that's never played before, they're going to walk in front of your ball on the green, and they're going to talk to you when you're teeing off, and they're going to mess up everything, and you're going to cringe because your other friends are going to be like, how did you bring this guy out on the golf course? Well, poker is even worse. There are all sorts of unwritten rules. So I created a whole lecture for you. I think it's about 45 minutes on poker etiquette and how to play properly. And many of you are going to get to play in a live tournament, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and I will expect you to follow this etiquette. Finally, if we have time, which I don't expect we will, but I've prepared some material, we're going to look at some variants of poker, like Omaha, high-low games, stud, and some different games. Maybe there'll be room for a sequel if I don't get to that. Let me talk about some resources. The main one for you to know is hopkinspokercourse.com. Feel free to take a picture of this slide if you need to, because there's some information, although I'll be posting all the lecture slides every day after class on hopkinspokercourse.com. So if that's the only thing you know, you can get the PDF of these slides shortly after class. So you don't need to take notes from the slides if that's something you're concerned about. We're also, you can see in the back, we're videotaping this. I've got a mic on, and our plan is to make the slides available on hopkinspokercourse.com with the video edited into them. And so for those of you that will have to miss a lecture here and there, what you can do is go to that website and watch that lecture, and you'll see the slides. I strongly discourage you from using that as a replacement for coming to class, because as you're going to see, we're going to do a lot of interactive things, and I think you learn a lot more by being here. But those slides will be, the taped lectures will be available to you. And the course assistants here are both named Daniel. Danny and Daniel are in the back. They're helping with the audio-visual, and they're also running the home games that we're going to be talking about in a minute that you guys are going to be playing in. They've been very, very helpful to me in preparing this course. So we're going to be using a site called BluffAv.com. This is a site that we're all going to have to create accounts on. And you go to BluffAv.com. It does require Flash. So use a machine that you can enable Flash on it. And we want you to set up your account as follows. For your first name, put your first name and your last name. The reason is that the site only displays your first name. And we want, for reasons I'll explain in a minute, to be able to see your name, your first and your last name. And then for your last name, put your last name, because it makes you do that. So first name, last name is your first name, and then last name is your last name. Once you're logged in, go to Find Group and select the group JHU Poker. After class today, Danny, our course assistant, is going to come up here and provide about a 15-minute tutorial on using BluffAv. And it's not required, but you're recommended that you stay if you have time and he will walk through the site and show you how to do it. But it is a requirement of the course that you do this, that you set up this account and that you play poker. So we're going to have cash tables available there. Now, I should point out, this is all play money. There's not going to be any real gambling in this class, but we're going to have very strong incentive for you to play as if it's real money. And I'll tell you those in a minute. So if you want to practice, go to the site, and if any other students in the class are on, you'll be able to play against them. And what I'm doing is designating 7 to 11 p.m. every night as the encouraged hours. So you're all encouraged between 7 and 11 to go in and play. And the site is supposed to create new tables. So let's say we have 40 people playing and more people show up. It'll create another table and they can go in and play at that table. I'm going to make an effort personally to play a lot. So you might see me there. It'll be my name. And one of the reasons that I want you all to use your real names is that I want you to get to know each other through poker. So if you're playing at a certain site and you see a particular name and that person is like, you know, always got it when you're playing against them and you get frustrated, you could kind of meet them in class and give them like your thoughts or something like that. Now, as a further incentive, every afternoon when I start class, I'm going to post, the first slide will be the top 10 leaders, the leaderboard for the cash games. And what does that mean? When you join the Bluff Av, you're going to get $10,000 in play money. And then you're going to play poker, and you're going to be able to add to that, or you're going to lose from that. And you also have the ability to reload if you need to. But you'll get a mark on your thing saying how many times you reloaded, so you can't trick us that way. And so we're going to look through right before class every day and see who the top 10 are in terms of winnings on the site, and you'll get the honor of being shown to the class. I'm hoping to penetrate that list occasionally, so look out. I'm going to be playing. Okay, we're also going to play some tournaments, and here's what we're going to do. And so one of the differences between cash and tournaments is that in a cash game, your chips are your chips. If you have a $5 chip, it's worth $5. And you can come and go as you please. So you can sit down at a cash game, play for half an hour, walk away, come back an hour later, play some more. A tournament has a start time. Everybody has to start at the same time. And you have to stay in the tournament until you're out or until it's over and you win. And so we're going to have 2 satellite tournaments on Bluff Ave. And these are the times and dates. You're required to play in at least one of them. You can play in both of them. And here's what we're going to do. Let's take the Tuesday tournament. So that's a week from tomorrow. This is online. You can play from anywhere that you have a computer and internet. The people who are in the top 20 when the tournament is over, so there's 230 of you, so assuming all of you enter the first satellite, the top 20 is going to be like 10%. They're going to qualify. I'll tell you what that means in a minute. Then we're going to do the same thing the next night, and you can play the second time even if you played the first time. In the second satellite, the top 20 who qualify, excluding the people who have already qualified, so if you're in the top 20 in both, you won't count in the second one, we'll take the next person down, you'll also qualify. So the big one is that next Thursday, a week from this Thursday, on January 23rd, I'm going to have a tournament at my house with 48 people. It's a live tournament. You come and you'll play with real chips. And the way that I will determine the 48 people is the 20 people who qualified from the first online, the 20 people who qualified from the second online, and my 8 discretionary seats. So the 8 discretionary seats are going to be, I'm going to get one. I'm going to give the course assistants one. And then various things. I've got some senior Hopkins administrators who are interested. They might get a seat. I'm going to have a riddle in the class. This is my favorite all-time riddle, and it's a poker riddle. And it's hard. I'll tell you that. It's a hard riddle. And I'm probably going to get to it tomorrow sometime. And if you don't know the riddle already, if you already know the riddle, you're not eligible to solve the riddle. You're not allowed to Google. You're not allowed to talk to anyone. The first person who sends me the correct answer to the riddle will get a seat automatically without having to qualify in the satellites. I may also decide that, and I'm still thinking about this, whoever's the leader in cash maybe will get an automatic seat, although I would expect that person to probably qualify through the tournaments anyway, but we'll see. And so then we're going to have some prizes, and I'll get to that in a minute for this tournament. Let me pause because I've been talking for a little bit now without taking a breath and see if you guys have any questions. Okay, so the next thing I want to do in this day and age is I want to raise the exposure of this class because I didn't get enough students this time. And so we're going to use Instagram. And what we're going to do is say that whoever posts on Instagram, including the @JHUPoker and hashtag JHUPoker in your caption, and you can take pictures in class anytime, won't bother me, take pictures that relate to poker. Whoever gets the most likes before noon on Tuesday the 21st, we're going to give you a seat into the tournament without having to qualify. So that should be your encouragement. That's the best I could do. I'm not a marketing person, so, and this was actually my course assistant's idea. In order to get you a little more excited, okay, you can wait to do Instagram for the next 5 minutes. These are pictures I took at home of the trophies, which I've already had made. So the one on the left is going to go to whoever wins the big tournament, the live one. It's actually quite big. It's about this big. It's a big trophy. I know, you're going to have to play hard. Then I had 2 of this one made. It's about this big, a little smaller. And that goes to the 2 satellite winners. So normally a satellite would stop after 20. So we would play down to 20, the 20 qualifiers, and everybody would go home. But now you're going to play for the satellite trophy. And the reason is I want you guys getting experience playing poker. So that's the whole idea here. So you play it all the way down. And the last thing here is called a bounty coin. This thing is about this big, and I took a picture of it to show you the 2 sides. This is going to go to whoever knocks me out of the live tournament. So this is going to sit in my stack, and if you're the person that knocks me out, assuming I don't win it, and I don't want to win it actually because I don't know what I'm going to do with that trophy, you will get that coin. Okay, and as I mentioned, we're going to have a demo by Danny after class for about 15 minutes of how to use the site. There are other resources for practicing poker. Zynga is an app that I like. You can go in, it's free, and you can practice. The games are a little silly, but if you really just want to see hands and get the experience, it's not bad. I like to watch poker on TV. Nowadays, you can watch a lot online, too. Poker After Dark is great. Cash games, those guys play like $500,000 buy-in, where they really buy in for their real money and play poker against each other. Famous pros. High Stakes Poker, I don't know if any of you guys know who Gabe Kaplan is, but he's the MC and knows poker really well. Welcome back, Cotter, probably. Only the 2 of us know what that is. Maybe 1 or 2 other people. So one of the things I'll encourage you to do if you watch poker on TV is there are 2 things that I think are fun to do. One is pause the action and think about what's going on in the hand. You see somebody do something. You've been learning in this class about the flop, the turn, the river, different strategies, different fundamentals. The guys that are playing on TV usually know that stuff really well. And so pause it and ask yourself, what would I do in this case? How should I be thinking about this? Another thing that you might want to do is on the screen, they'll often show the cards that the players have. Put a piece of tape over that and try to figure out, what, based on how they're playing, what do they have? And that can actually lead you to reason about poker and think about it. So let me talk a little bit about the difference between theory and practice. In lectures, I'm going to be giving you guys theory. But when you're home playing in the class, you're going to be getting practice. So I think that knowing all the theory without actually playing a lot, without getting your hands dirty, would be like trying to learn how to fly an airplane from a book, right? Do you think you could do that? You learn all the theory about how to fly an airplane and then just get in an airplane and expect to be able to fly it. I don't think so. And same thing with poker. In fact, people have asked me before, who do you think would be a better poker player? Somebody like me who studies all the math, who studies all the theory, who plays, once a week, a couple times a month, or a guy who doesn't know anything about the theory or the math, but he plays 40 hours a week for all the time. He's a full-time player. And it's easy, the guy who plays all the time, because you see every situation and you develop intuitions and what worked and what didn't work. So you cannot just learn the theory and not play. You have to spend time learning how to play. Okay. So let me tell you, this is a pass-fail class, right? So there has to be a way to pass and there has to be a way to fail. And let me tell you what you're going to need to do. First thing is you're going to have to watch 2 movies. I know that that's hard, but the 2 movies are Rounders and All In, the poker movie. Rounders, by the way, is the greatest movie of all time. You have to play online cash games, and you have to register at least 6 hours in the course of the semester. I'll probably put that in tonight, but I expect you guys that, that's a bare minimum. Don't just meet the 6 hours and then stop. You have to play at least one of the satellites. And then if you qualify, obviously the live tournament, I probably wouldn't have to twist your arm. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And finally, come to class. I won't be taking attendance, but every class is going to build on the other classes. And once I get into some of the heavy theory, if you miss a class, I think it's going to be very hard to come to the next class after that. Okay, so we decided to make it a little easy for you. We're going to show the movies in here. Now, these are movies you can watch anytime on your own, but Friday, January 17th, this Friday at 7:30 in this very room, using a laptop and Netflix, we're going to have it. Not providing food or anything, but you guys can do what you want for that, but that's when we're showing the movie. We're going to have 2 showings of the All In movie. One will be the day after tomorrow at 7:30 in this room. I'm probably going to come to that. I can watch these movies infinite number of times. And then next Monday, it's Martin Luther King Day, so we don't have class. But if anybody wants to come in here and see the movie, you can come watch it then. And then obviously, Rounders is available on Netflix, and All In is available on Prime, so you can watch these on your own anytime you like. Now, on January 22nd, the Wednesday of the second week, we're going to have a special guest. This is Steve Daneman from Severna Park, Maryland. He is a self-employed CPA, but more interestingly for us, in 2005, he came in second in the main event. He won $4.5 million. And he also placed 5th in the Tournament of Champions, for which he had a really big score as well. He is one of the real characters in poker. He's on TV a lot. He's absolutely hilarious. I've played at his house a couple of times. I've played cash games with him, and he's just fun to be around. He, for a while, went on the speaking circuit, talking as a motivational speaker about his experience in the World Series. He has offered to come speak to you guys for half an hour to tell his story of coming in second in the main event. And then he said he wants like 10 to 15 minutes of questions. So come listen to him, ready to ask him questions. Okay, we're almost ready to get started with actual poker as opposed to introductions. So let me talk about poker. There's going to be math in this class. I know there are people in this room who are not math majors and hoped that they could come to a school like Hopkins to never have to take math again. I'm sorry, you're going to get some math. And the math is mostly at a 6th grade level. You could do addition, subtraction, multiplication. There is a little bit of probability. There's going to be some statistics, and there's going to be combinatorics. Don't let any of that scare you. Because nowhere in the list of requirements to pass the class did I say you have to pass a test on combinatorics, right? You have to play 6 hours, watch the movies, come to class. Okay. There's going to be some game theory, and I think that going through my slides, some of it will seem really complicated, especially in the beginning. But if you sit through it, I have a lot of repetition and a lot of examples. So if I give you guys an example with some math in it, and you're like, oh, you lost me, the next hand I'm going to give is going to have the same thing, and maybe by the time I've gone through a few of them, you should all be good with that. And please stop and ask me questions. I don't mind at all. Even in a large class like this, I think if 1 or 2 people are lost, there's probably other people who are lost as well, and it's better for me to know that than to go on. And don't forget to just play poker. So let me talk a little bit about poker players, because there are different types. Casual poker player, I think that would be most people. You just play poker from time to time. Recreational, that's the category I would put myself in. You play between once a week and once a month, and you really like poker. You get very competitive, but you have a day job, and poker is a hobby and not your life. The next one is a grinder or regular. If you play at the Horseshoe Casino downtown, and you sit down at a table, at least 3/4 of the people you'll be playing with will be grinders. Those guys they play poker for a living. That's what they do. They're eking out $10 to $15 an hour. They say it's, you know, the hardest way to make an easy living because you're just playing poker, and they're very good, but they're not very creative. And I think I can teach you guys to beat them pretty regularly. But they're not looking to beat people who know how to play. They're in there because they're looking for the recreational and the casual players to sit down and lose money to them, the ones who didn't study the game. Okay, there are other types. A whale. These are some of the things. 3 of these are not things you want to be called at the poker table. A whale is, you'll see these guys in home games mostly, but they show up in the casinos too. Super rich guy. His favorite thing in the world is to pull $100 bills out of his pocket and put them on the table. He's playing to be popular, not to win. And he will lose a lot of money, and that's the guy you want at your table. The donkey is a bit of a variation. A whale can be a donkey, they often are, but a donkey is a guy, he might even think he's pretty good, but this player is horrible, right? They don't understand the first thing about fundamentals. They don't understand anything about what you're supposed to do and what position is and pot odds and any of that. They just play a lot of poker, and they're really bad. Another guy you want at your table. The fish is another interesting type of player. And these are all player types. If you start to play a lot in the casinos, you'll see these guys. And the fish is a guy, they're never aggressive. They're just super passive. They don't mind calling, putting money in, but they never raise, and it's very easy to play against them. And then there's a special kind of fish called a shark, and those are the really super good players, and you got to look out for those. Now, one of the things that's important when you're playing poker and you sit down at a table is to figure out for your opponents, okay? Usually there are going to be 9 people at a table. The other 8 people, you know, what are they? Is it a whale? Is it a shark? Is it a recreational player? Is it a tourist? That's going to really give you a lot of information that you'll use in your decision making later. Now, the poker world is a great social outlet. You can have a lot of fun playing socially with your friends. It's also something you can be really, really competitive at. You meet interesting people. I've sat at a poker table in Vegas where the guy to my left is the CEO of a big company, and the guy to my right is a handyman. And I can have just as interesting conversations and afterwards walk away and say, in no other experience of my life would I have gotten to know these 2 guys the way I just got to know them. And that's kind of one of the fun thing about poker is it's completely egalitarian. Everybody, if you can play poker and you have some money, you can play and you can get to know all kinds of interesting people. And then there's the Chris Moneymaker story. Chris Moneymaker is featured right here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. He really is the guy credited with turning the poker world around and making poker very popular. The All In Poker movie is a documentary about him. And he has a very, very fun name for being this guy, and we're going to talk about him in a minute, and I'll tell you why he's so important after the next bit. So poker, on the other hand, I should mention there is a dark side. It is addictive, and even great players can go on losing streaks. And I've seen people playing with their rent money, and it's not fun, and I usually try to advise them to walk away, and they don't listen. And sometimes it brings out the worst in people. I've been in a casino where someone, you know, I try to be a pretty nice guy, I'm mellow, I'm not aggressive, stood up and threatened to physically hurt me, and security had to take them out because he didn't like a call I made on the river against him. And that really happened to me. So, you know, poker does bring out the worst in people and the best in people. So let me start with a little bit of kind of the first strategy lesson, which is to be the house. And what do I mean by that? If you play blackjack or craps in a casino, you will never ever win money in the long run. And casinos would not be in business if they didn't have an edge, right? In blackjack, the casino has an edge because all the other players act first, and if you bust, the house wins. And so they know that over time, they're going to win, even if it looks like you can win. And I know people that tell me they're really good in blackjack. And I'm like, wow, you approached that 49%. Good for you. You know, the house is going to have the edge. And so what you want in poker is the law of large numbers says if you have an edge and you play a lot, you will win, period. Right? That's what keeps casinos in business. So your goal in poker is to be the house. You want to have situations where you have the edge. Even if it's a 10% edge in a cash game, you want to repeat that situation over and over. And how do you get that edge? you learn some skills, you learn the fundamentals, and you get a lot of experience. And that's one of the reasons you want to get to know your other players at the table. Say, do I have an edge against this player? When I sit down in a 2-5 game in a casino, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, and I see that the other players are all much better than me, and I can tell after a very short amount of time these are really good players, I just walk away. I don't have an edge. These guys are going to crush me. Go for a table where you've got, the donkeys, the whales, etc. We're going to learn a lot of jargon in this course. I've probably already used some words that you didn't know. And here on the board are some of the things: drawing dead, the nuts, in position, out of positions, bad beat. By the time this course is over, you're going to know all of these and then some. A bad beat is where you're ahead in a hand, and you get all the money in, and you're way ahead, and there are only 2 cards in the deck that your opponent can hit to beat you, and of course that card comes and they beat you, and you've just suffered a bad beat. And here's a life pro tip, that it is a lot more fun to tell someone your bad beat story than it is to hear them. You can ask my wife about that. It is not fun to listen. So they're even at the World Series, they set up this bad beat booth, and you can pay $10 and they'll listen to your bad beat story and you tell them what went wrong. Okay, so we're ready to learn about poker. Here we have hand rankings. This slide is really only going to help those that raise their hand saying you've never played poker before. So in poker, you're going to have a 5-card hand. And nothing excites me more than sitting down at a cash poker game in a casino and seeing somebody show up with a printout of this. And they're looking at it. So high card is basically you don't have anything in your hand except the highest card that's in your hand. So if you look at this hand here, this is an ace-high hand. Next, we have a pair. So you have 1 pair and really nothing else. That's better than a high card hand. Each one of these is going to be progressively better. So 2 pair is you have kings and 6s here. So out of the 5 cards, you have 2 pairs. Next is 3 of a kind. Then you have a straight. A straight is where your cards are consecutive. And ace is low or high, but it can't be both. So you can't go king, ace, 2, 3, 4. But you can go ace, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can go 10, jack, queen, king, ace. Or any 5 cards that are in a row is a straight. A flush is when all your cards are the same suit. I suppose I don't have to start with the basics. There's 52 cards, 4 suits. I'm going to assume one thing that you guys all know. Full house is you have 3 of a kind and a pair in your hand. That's better than a flush. And then 4 of a kind is where you have 4 cards that are all the same and another card. In this case, it's an ace, but any other card. That's a pretty good hand. You're almost never going to lose with that one. A straight flush, though, will beat that. And that's where all your cards are in a row. You have a straight, but they're also the same suit. So you have a straight flush. That's the best possible hand in poker. And above that is just the best straight flush, which is a royal flush. So this is something you're going to have to memorize. If you're not familiar with it, then you should print out this slide after I post them and then use it when you play. Now, Texas Holdem is a variant of poker. It's the most popular game in the world right now. The most popular poker game anyway. So each player is dealt 2 cards face down. So you get to see your 2 cards, but no one else gets to see them. And you look at your cards, and then there's a round of betting. The next thing that happens is 3 community cards are dealt face up in the middle of the board. And now you know that those cards are potential cards for your hand. So you have the 2 cards that are in your hand and the 3 cards that are on the board. So far you've seen 5 cards, so that could be your hand. But there are going to be 2 more cards. There's another card, that's called the turn. So now there are 4 cards on the board and you've got 2 cards in your hand. And so you have 6 cards from which you're going to choose the best 5. And then 1 more card is dealt, and that's the river, and there's another round of betting. And now the hand is over. So we can see an example up here. There are 5 cards on the board. These 3 came first. One player had king, queen, and the other had 10, jack. When the flop came, these 3 cards, the player with 10, jack flopped 2 pair. You see that? Because he's got 2 10s and 2 jacks when he combines his 2 cards with the board's 5 cards. And the other player flopped what's called an open-ended straight draw. What do I mean by that? A draw means that there's still cards to come, and you hope to draw. That is, when one of those cards comes, it will give you a better hand. And so if we look at the flop in this example, 10, Jack, Deuce, and King, Queen, it's got more than just a straight draw. He's also got a heart draw, right? Because any card that comes that is an ace, a 9, or a heart will give him a really super strong hand. Is anybody that doesn't see that? OK, so on the turn came the 9, which gave him a straight. He still has 2 pair. And then on the river came a 6. And so the King, Queen would have won this hand with a straight. So we're going to look at like 5 or 6 examples like that of different hands. And so you play the best 5 cards. So I want to do a little quiz with you guys. I want you to look at this. And when you have determined who wins, raise your hand so that I see it. And once, like if I nod at you, you can put your hand down. One way to do this is to look at the top 4, see which is the best hand, look at the bottom 4, see which is the best hand, and then take the best hand out of that. So I'm looking at you guys to see when somebody tells me they have an idea. OK? OK, so I'm going to need to come up. I think most of the hands went up at some point. I think I've never taught this big a class. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to let people talk and then to like cut it off, because there's a lot of people talking. So let's kind of go through this together. First, I want to ask for if somebody wants to volunteer to tell the class which is the best hand and why. OK. OK, so the comment was seat 7 because they have a full house. Does everybody agree with that? Yes. Now, the question is, on this one, don't talk to each other. But you've already looked at this for a while. Who has the second best hand? And let me ask you guys, does anybody think it's seat 1? So this is a little tricky, right? Seat 1 has 2 pair. But so does seat 9, right? C9 has aces and 2s. And the aces are higher than the 10. So in this case, the aces and 2s is better than the 10s and 6s. Everybody see that? So the best hand is the full house. And the second best is aces and 2s. OK, now, what is the best possible hand? Just look at the board. Don't look at the hands that people have. And this is always an important question to ask yourself. And the reason is that if you have a full house, are you willing to put all your money in the middle? You need to know if you have the best possible hand. So give this a look, and let me see hands if you have an idea of what the best possible hand here is. OK, so do I have a volunteer to tell the class? Right there. Quad 2s, right? So if somebody has 2 2s in their hand, they have the best possible hand. And this is, in general, when you have a pair on the board, the best possible hand is 4 of a kind, right? You could have the same 2 cards in your hand, and then you have a 4 of a kind. Now look at this and try to determine what is the second best possible hand that somebody could have.
What about 3, 4, 5 cards?
So the problem is you only get 2 cards. So, yeah. Yes? A flush with spades, I think we can beat that. Yes, in the back. Pocket 10s, right? If you have pocket 10s, now you have 3 10s and 2 2s, so you have a full house, right? Now, here's another question entirely, and this is where you start to see that poker can be really interesting. Who would have likely won the hand? Don't show me hands, because this is completely subjective, and I'll tell you my opinion, but different players will disagree about this. So the question is, who would have likely won this hand if this were played out? And the first answer is, I did not give you enough information. I didn't tell you how much money they're playing, how the betting went, blah, 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 blah. But even so, even with lack of information, I can almost assure you that the 9s, which have the best hand, would not have won this hand. And the reason is, they never would have seen the river, right? We would have seen a flop. And if it's 10 deuce 10, the aces would have probably bet. The 10 6 would have probably called. right? Those two guys have really good hands on that flop. Nobody else has much of anything on the flop. And so the 9s with the 10 out there, worried that someone else might have a 10, would probably fold. On the turn, the 9s would surely have folded if there was some betting. And so it's important to look at a hand as to what would have really happened, not just who has the best hand. OK, I have one other slide like this asking who would win this one. This one's a little tricky. So take some time. I'm going to take a chance and let you talk to your neighbor. But when I cut it off, stop talking right away. So go ahead and try to figure out who wins this and talk to your neighbor. OK, I saw enough hands. I'll cut it off here. Do I have a volunteer who wants to tell the class who has the best hand here? Yes?
Seat 9 and seat 7.
Seat 9 and seat 7 tie. Why?
Because that's 5 cards already, so the second one in their hands.
That's right. So the idea is the best hand is your 5 cards. And seat 9 has queens and 8s with an ace. The 7 and the 3 don't play. In every 7-card hand, you have to say 2 of the cards aren't going to play. And seat 7, even though he has a better card with his ace, he doesn't get to use it because his hand is queens and 8s with an ace. And so this is called a chop pot, where 2 hands are equivalent. This is really bad luck for seat 7 because seat 7 started the hand with a huge lead over seat 9. In fact, we say that he dominated him because he had 1 card in common and 1 card that was bigger than the other guy's second card. But once that river came with that last 8, they ended up with exactly the same hand. Is there anybody that doesn't see that? So you can have ties in poker. If you have the same 5-card hand, then you will split the pot. OK? Now, same question I asked before. What's the best possible hand? This is a really, really easy one based on what we've done so far. Yes? Pocket queens, right? 4 of a kind. And what's going to happen to someone if one person has pocket queens and the other person has pocket 8s? Bad beat story. We don't want to hear it. OK. Now let me tell you about 2 big types of straight draws. These are going to come up a lot. We have what's called the the double belly buster. You will sit at a poker someday and hear somebody say, I had a double belly buster. And you'll be able to say, I took poker at Hopkins, I know what that is. So the idea is that 2 different cards will give you a straight. Let's say that you have 6, 7, and the flop is 5, 9, 3. OK? You have yourself a double belly buster. And why is that? Because there are 2 card ranks. A rank is just the level of the card, like a 4 is a rank 4. 8 different cards in the deck that will give you a straight. Any 4 or any 8. Now, it takes a little bit of practice to recognize this. Most people who are just starting out would look at this and they might see the 8. I think the 8 is more obvious than the 4. But if you look at this, if a 4 comes on the turn, you're going to have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's a straight, right? And if an 8 comes, you're going to have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is important to keep in mind that you have 8 cards that can give you a straight. There are 8 cards out of the remaining cards in the deck that can give you a straight, right? Now, this is going to be well disguised if you hit it. And something to think about in poker is your hand obvious or is it well disguised? Remember a minute ago we had a board with 2 queens and 2 8s? And you're not, let's say you have a queen in your hand or 2 queens in your hand. You're not going to get paid because it's very unlikely someone's going to call you when the board is so scary. 2 queens, 2 8s, and if you have even a straight there, you know that anyone with a queen or an 8 has a full house. Whereas in this board, if a 4 were to come on the turn, you're going to have a straight, but it's not going to look like you have anything. So the more disguised your hand is, the stronger it is in terms of getting paid. Let's contrast that with an open-ended straight draw, which is the other kind of straight draw. So let's say that you have 10 jack, and the flop is 9 queen deuce. So you have a straight draw because either a king or an 8 will give you a straight, right? But if that king comes or if that 8 comes, the board is going to look very straighty, right? It's going to look a lot scarier, especially if the cards are high. And the reason that high cards matter is that people will usually assume that you're playing with higher cards because you're folding your lower cards. So let me pull in some useful and cool facts. One thing that's really cool about these is that many of them, I think, are known to pretty regular experienced players, but some of them are not. So you cannot make a full house or better without a pair on the board. So if you're looking at the 5 cards on the river and none of them are paired, you don't have to worry about somebody having a full house. You can't make a flush without 3 of a suit on the board, right? Because you only have 2 cards. And so in order to make a flush, you have to have 3 of a suit, which means that if you have a straight and on the board there's no pair and you don't have 3 of a suit, your straight's probably good. What could you lose to, though? Let's see a hand if you have an idea what you could lose to. Yes? A higher straight. Beware what's called the idiot end of the straight. Okay? So if the board is 4, 5, 6, and you have 2, 3, you've got a straight, but you've got the idiot end because somebody could have the higher end, and then you're going to lose a lot of money. Straights can be tricky to identify, and furthermore, very few boards that don't have a pair on them can't have a straight. You can come up with a board that doesn't have a straight, but most of the time, a straight is possible. So what does that mean if you have 3 of a kind or 2 pair? You always have to consider, could my opponent have a straight? But you cannot have a straight without a 5 or a 10. This is one of those things that I think even very experienced players don't consider. And if you think about it, it makes sense because the cards go from ace to king, right? Let's take ace as low, or from 2 to ace if ace is high. And a straight is 5 in a row. So imagine a continuum that you have written out all of the cards on a continuum from 2 up to ace. And you had to put 5 in a row, and you got to slide it wherever you wanted. At the very high end, you're going to go ace down to 10. You're going to have a 10. And at the very low end, you're going to go ace up to 5. And there's nowhere in the middle that you can put those 5 without hitting either the 5 or the 10. One of the things like where you can use this is say that you have a pair of 10s in your pocket, and you're worried, and you're worried that your opponent might have a straight. You know that if they have high cards, they're a lot less likely to have a straight if you've got pocket 10s, because there's only 2 more 10s in the deck, and they have to have a 10 to have a straight. They might have a 5, but you can maybe rule out the 5 in that situation based on the betting. Here's another fact. This is something that can save you a lot of money. Bottom 2 pair is vulnerable. And I'm going to show you an example of this. But if you have bottom 2 pair, imagine that the board is 7, 8, king, and you've got 7, 8, right? So you've got 2 pair. Normally that's a great flop. But what happens if another king comes on the turn? Now the kings are paired, and you've got the kings and 8s, but you no longer have a pair of 7s. And now anybody else with a higher pair than your 8s has you beat, because there are 2 kings on the board. And if you didn't follow that, because I know some people are visual, I'll show you an example of that. Let me ask a question. Under what circumstances is your full house the best possible hand? So remember we said that if there are 2 queens on the board, then quad queens are the best hand possible. And you also can't have a full house without there being a pair on the board. So let's say that you have a full house, and there are times when you know that you have the best possible hand. So I'm going to give you a minute to talk to your neighbor, and then we'll see. If you guys get it, raise your hand. I want to see how many people solve this. So go ahead. Yes. Very good. So if there's a pair on the board, let's say there's a pair of queens, and your full house involves you having a queen, nobody can have 2 queens. So if you have the high pair on the board, then you know that you can have the best possible hand. Everybody follow that? If you have the best possible full house, the only way that you know for a fact that nobody has quads is if you have another one of the card that's the pair on the board, right? And then nobody can have a better hand than you. Okay, so let me show you. Now let's walk through a hand. This is going to, in the survey, I asked you guys how many of you knew what counterfeiting was, and I only saw like 3 or 4 hands. So I feel like I'm actually going to teach something now. We're going to look at a hand here where we see 2 of the player's cards. One has 10-7, and the other has a pair of queens, right? The flop comes Jack 7-10, and that's a great flop for the player with 7-10, right? Because they flop 2 pair. But remember I said bottom 2 pair is vulnerable. If the turn comes like this, a jack, now who has the best hand? The queens. Because his hand is queens and jacks, and the other guy's is 7s and 10s. And queens and jacks is better than 7s and 10s. So when you flop bottom 2, you should be happy, but like worried. Okay. All right, let me look at, there are different ways that you can have your hand counterfeited. Here's a really cool one. So let's say that you've got a pair of 6 and the other player has ace queen. Both of these are, I would consider, playable hands in general. And the flop comes 9-9 king. Who's got the best hand right now? 6s, right? Because he has 2 pair. Yeah, he has 2 pair and the ace queen is just ace high. And now the 6s are still ahead, right? If we were to stop the hand here and you had to pick your best 5 cards, the 6s would have 2 pair and the ace queen would have 1 pair. And now a jack comes. Oops. The 6s now, what is his hand? He's playing the board, right? Playing the board is an expression for your 2 cards are the 2 that aren't counting. So the ace queen has an ace that plays, so his hand is jacks and 9s with an ace, and the other guy has no hand. Okay, now let's look at an example with an action turn card. So I'm slowly building up to you to get to the fundamentals. We're just doing the mechanics right now. And I'm not showing you betting yet, just trying to get a feel for hands. Let's say that crazy situation, and these are the hands that are dealt to everyone at the table. The reason I say it's a crazy situation is very rarely do so many good hands get dealt on the same hand. We're going to look at probabilities later in the course and see that you're only going to be dealt a pair 1 in 17 times. So it's very unlikely that a bunch of people will all have a pair at the table at the same time. So let's see here. This guy got a pair of jacks. That's a decent hand. This guy has ace jack, 5-8, etc. We can see what all the hands are. This guy has a particularly strong hand. This guy has the third possible best hand. This is a garbage hand. And that's kind of where we're at, right? So let's say that the first thing that happens is there's some betting and the 10 deuce folds because he should fold. And now let's see what happens on the flop. The flop comes 5-8-3. This is a technical term for this is crazy action flop. Let's see why. The jacks, they flopped an overpair, right? They have a pair above the board. It's always a good thing to have. It's an overpair. This guy, not much going on. He has an ace. This guy flopped 2 pair. That's pretty good. It's not even bottom 2. He's got top pair and middle pair. It's top 2. That's good. He flopped an open-ended straight draw, right? 5, 6, 7, 8. That means that any 4 or any 9 is going to give him a straight. This guy has a pair of 4s, not much going on. He flopped a pretty strong hand because any heart will give him a flush. So he's got a flush draw. But he's also got 2 large overcards to the board, meaning any ace or king might also give him the best hand. Little does he know someone has 2 pair already. But in general, it's good to have overcards with your flush draw. He has top pair. So he's got the 8, which matches the top pair on the board. He's probably going to call a bet. He's got a big overpair to the board. So everybody here flopped a little something, right? They're all happy. Now we're going to see a crazy action turn. 4 hearts. That is the most crazy turn you could have had here. All right, let's see why. The jacks, they still have an overpair, but they need to be a little nervous because that board, it's called wet. When a board has a lot of straights and flush possibilities, it's called wet. When it doesn't, it's called dry. So this is a very wet board, so the jacks should be nervous. Ace jack, it's time to fold. Okay, 5-8. You were happy with 2 pair, but you did not want to see a heart, and you did not want to see a straighty card. This guy is doing jumping jacks, right? He just made a straight. Little does he know he's in big trouble. Now the 4s made a set. A set is when you have a pair in your hand, and the card that matches that comes on the board. It's actually the situation we were talking about earlier with the best full house. So he's very happy, although concerned about the hearts and the straights, but he's not going anywhere with a set. Sets are very strong. This guy's doing a little dance because he just flopped the nut flush. The word nut means the best possible, and that is a poker technical term, I kid you not, in a maybe chauvinistic way, but it's, you have the nuts, you've got the best possible hand. So he's got, does he have the best possible hand right now or just the best possible flush right now? Best possible hand, right? The board is not paired, so no one could have a full house. So he has the best possible hand at the moment, and the best possible flush, obviously. He does. If he gets a 2 of hearts, he's going to have a straight flush. Good observation. Now, the 8-9, how happy are you with your top pair now? Not very, but I've seen, now remember the word donkey? If you look at this board and you have an 8 and you think you have the best hand, you may be considering that title. And then queens, you're getting nervous. So queens and jacks. Now the river. Oh my God. As if I didn't know. I mean, I made these slides. All right. So, so let's look at it. The jacks now has 2 pair. He may feel good about himself. Ace jack, well, a lot of times when there's a pair on the board on the last card, you figure it didn't complete any draws, but I don't think he's going to call if there's a lot of betting. 5-8, now he's really happy, right? He went from 2 pair to a full house. The straight over here, he hates that the board paired because now he knows that full houses are possible, quads are possible, but those are very unlikely too because it's just hard to make them. There aren't that many 5s in the deck once there's a 5 on the board. So I think the straight is probably going to lose some money here. He may not go away, but the worst victim here is the 4s. The poor 4s has the worst full house. He has not the worst possible, but the worst one that anyone has right now. So he's got what's called 4s full of 5s, meaning the card that he has 3 of a kind in is 4s, and the pair that he has is 5s. And so he's very, very happy right now. He's about to be very, very sad. The flush here also, he's not happy to see the board pair because he knows full houses are possible. The 8 might be getting the idea at this point, and the queens, I don't know. But the bottom line is the 5-8 made a bigger full house than the 4s. Now, is there a lesson here? Should you be folding full houses? Almost never. Okay? It's really rare when you make a full house that someone else made a better full house. Exception to that is when the 3 of a kind is on the board, right? So if you've got 3 6s on the board, and well, you should be worried anyway, right? But let's say you have 3 9s on the board. Let's make it a little safer than 3 6s. So you have 3 9s on the board, and you have a pair of 10s in your pocket. Any pair above 10s is beating you. And let's say there's 3 9s on the board and a king on the board. Anybody with a king is beating you, right? So your full house, when there's 3 of a kind on the board, isn't that strong. But if there's just a pair on the board, your full house is very strong. OK, let's look at another interesting hand. You have pocket aces, which is the best possible hand pre-flop in poker, against 4-5 suited. And the flop comes like this. Who's ahead? This is the easy question. The aces, right? The other guy has 5 high. He has nothing. Now the 10 comes on the turn. Who's ahead? Aces. And now the jack comes on the river. Who's ahead? Nobody, right? Everybody's playing the board. Now what you often see when this happens is one of the players will put out a really big bet. That happens a lot. Why are they doing that? They're representing a king, right? If you have a king in this spot, you have a higher straight than the board. Everybody else is just playing the board. And so when you get a case where you might have multiple players in a hand and you get a straight on the board and no flushes and no pair, obviously, if there's a straight on the board, you often see a lot of action. And what you might even see is one guy puts out a bet and the other guy's like, yeah, I don't think he has a king. He wants the whole pot instead of a fraction of the pot. So I'm going to raise him. And somebody raises you. Now they're representing the king. And so you get into these mind games like, well, is he bluffing, et cetera. We're going to talk about that a lot. So I haven't talked at all about betting yet. So let's talk about the money, which is what we're all here for, right? So in Holdem, we start out with 3 of the players being special. We have the button who's going to have a dealer button in front of them. We're going to have a small blind who's putting out a small bet even though they don't see what the flop is yet, or even before they see their cards. So that's why it's called a blind bet, because you don't know what your hand's going to be. And the big blind has to put out the big bet. And the blinds can be 1-3, 1-2, 2-5. It doesn't have to be double, but one is smaller than the other. And the next player is said to be under the gun. So we have a dealer, a small blind, a big blind, and then these are forced bets. This is how you start a Holdem hand. For example, if the stakes are 1-3, the small blind will put out $1, the big blind would put out $3. To the left of the big blind is the under the gun player. He's going to be the first one to act, so he's under the gun. And the minimum bet that he can make is the big blind. And the second minimum bet he can make is 2 big blinds. So let's say that the blinds are 1-3. His options are 3, 6, or something more than 6. Can't bet 5. It's just a rule. And then there's something called a blind straddle. So a blind straddle is when, wait, where did I go? Blind straddles. This only happens in cash games. And you can see here the dealer has put out 2 big blinds before the hand is dealt. And the under the gun can also post it, and a straddle is considered live. What is it? It's just a blind bet. You haven't got your cards yet, and you're saying, let's liven up the action. 1-3 isn't big enough for me. I want to play 1-3-6, so you put $6 out. And then in the Mississippi straddle, which is what like the Horseshoe Casino has, you can straddle in any position, but the button gets priority. So if this guy tries to straddle, the button can say, nuh-uh, I'm straddling. And you can do from 2 to 5 times the big blind. And it basically raises the stakes of the game. And then you're going to get to act last pre-flop. That's the last thing I'm going to say about straddles. It's not a big deal, but I wanted to say it because if you do play poker in a casino someday, they're going to be straddling. So each player has a certain number of chips on the table. That's considered your effective stack. Say you put $200 down at a cash table, you get $200 worth of chips, your stack is $200. You're only allowed to bet up to your chip stack. So you might see in the movies where someone's pulling car keys out or deeds to their home and stuff like that. That doesn't actually really happen in poker. So this has a result that different players at the table will have different chip stack sizes. For example, let's say player A has $1,500, player B has $800, and player C has $2,300. And let's say that they all go all in. All in is that move where you push all your chips into the middle. So if they go all in, then player B can only win $1,600, right? He can win $800 from player A, and he can win $800 from player C, but he can't win more than that. So if you have 800 and you're up against 2 players with bigger stacks than you have, the most that you can win is 1,600. And this creates what are called side pots. So let's look at a scenario where all 3 players go all in, and player B has the best hand, and player A has the second best hand, right? So player B will win $2,400, which is the 800 from the other 2 players plus his own 800 back. Everybody see that? That's called the main pot. So if you go all in for 800 and these 2 go in for more than 800, you just get 800 from each of them. You get your 800, and that's your win. And then there's a side pot between the other 2 players. And the side pot in this case would be 1,400. Why? Because player A has 700 more than 800, right? So if you look at player A's $1,500 stack and you break it up into 800 and 700, and player C, you take his 2,300 and you say it's 800, 700, and then another 800. The original 800 from each of them goes to player B. The 700 from player C and the 700 that A put in goes back to A, and C gets back his 800 because he had the most. So if you have the most chips, you can't lose all your chips. And we often refer to somebody's stack as how many big blinds they have as opposed to how much money they have. So if you're playing a 1-3 game and you have $300, you have 100 big blinds. And for a lot of the math that we're going to do in this class, it's easier to just look at how many big blinds somebody has as opposed to how much money they have. So now let's look at a hand that has some betting in it. Okay. So in this hand, we have a dealer, we have a small blind, the big blind has 7-10. This guy has a pair of 4s, and this guy has a pair of queens. Okay? Now, the under the gun player is the one immediately to the left of the $2, right? He folds. And the pair of 4s is going to bet $15. Let me take that slide back. You see he has $400. This really took my PowerPoint skills to the max. So he bets $15, and now he's left with $385, right? Now we're going to see the next two players fold, and the queens bet 60. So he has re-raised it. He's got a really strong hand, and his stack went from 400 to 340. Notice that this guy over here started the hand with $200, right? And these guys started the hand with $400. So next thing we're going to have is these guys are all going to fold, and the big blind is going to go all in for $200. Donkey move, right? 7-10. But he does it for this example. The $1 that the small blind put in the pot stays in the pot, even though he folded. So now, what are the 4s going to do? Well, he's actually just going to go all in. This is not a good strategy, but I'm just trying to teach you the mechanics. So he goes all in, and the queens has an easy call. This is the right strategy. He calls 400. Now let's look at what happened. The big blind went all in for 200. The other two players each went all in for 400. So how much is going to be in the main pot? Let's see a hand, someone who knows. Yes?
601.
601, right? We're going to take 200 from each player and the 1, and that'll be the main pot. And how much is in the side pot? See a hand. Yes? 400, right? Because the other two players, once they put their 200 in, now they're putting 200 into a side pot. So you can see in the top left, the main pot is 601, and the side pot is 400. Now notice that here we say this guy's all in, but these guys are all in plus the side pot. So if one of them wins the hand, they're going to win the side pot. So the flop comes Jack 8-3. Who's in the lead? Queens, right? And now a 4 comes, so the pair of 4s is in the lead. He's got 3 of a kind. And now a 9 comes, which gives the 7-10. Sometimes the donkey wins. It's very frustrating, but they do. And he made a straight. So he's going to win $601, and the player with the 4s is going to win 400. And notice that the guy that had the best hand pre-flop loses everything. Bad beat booth. OK. Let me talk for a little bit about chess versus poker. So a lot of people ask me all the time, is poker skill or luck? I can't tell you how many times I get asked that question. It's a very frustrating question if you spend hours and hours studying the game, because if it was luck, then you've just wasted your time. In chess, the best player almost always wins, right? If you play chess against someone that's got a higher rating than you, you're probably going to lose. In poker, the best player will win more often than the worst player. But the worst player is going to win sometimes, because like we saw in the last hand, the guy that played the 7-10, he was the worst player. He played it horribly, but he won. And that'll keep him coming back, which is what the good players want. In chess, the worst player is probably going to go frustrated and quit. And in poker, the bad players, every once in a while, they're going to win, so they keep playing, and they actually think they're good. In the World Championship of Chess, only the top handful of players can compete. In poker, you just need $10,000, and you can enter the World Series main event. In fact, they're kind of counting on that. That's how they build up those huge pots. Playing chess well is very, very hard. Playing poker well is also very hard. But it's very easy to play badly and not realize it. So with poker, you have to constantly question yourself. You don't want to be what's called results-oriented, where I won, I must have been really good, right? You might have gotten lucky. So the bottom line is, I think that chess is clearly a game of skill. I think poker is clearly a game of skill. But in poker, the skill is to get your edges. And in chess, it's not about getting edges. It's just downright winning. In poker, you've won if you have a better chance of winning more often than your opponents. So let me talk a little bit about cash games versus tournaments and what the differences are. Cash game, your chip value is a cash value. So if you have $250 in chips, you have $250. It's a one-to-one mapping. The blinds will always stay the same. If you're playing a cash game that's 1-3, it's 1-3 forever. If you want to move to a bigger game, you just have to take your chips, get off the table, find another table. You can add chips to your stack at any time. So this is a super important point because we're going to look in the theory that we get into at the difference between a deep stack and a shallow stack. A deep stack is when you have a lot of chips. And the strategy gets much more complicated when you have a lot of chips than when you don't have a lot of chips. And in a cash game, if you end up with very few chips because you lose a big hand, you can reach into your wallet and put more chips on the table, and now you have a big stack. And you can just buy in for more. Same thing if you're online. You, in a cash game, can take any available seat. Body odor is a real problem in casinos. And when I sit down at a table, if I'm very unlucky, next to someone who doesn't know where the shower is, I can just get up and take another seat. You're allowed to move. You're not in tournaments. You're never allowed to remove chips from a table in a cash game. So if you sit down, you're comfortable playing with $100, but you're not comfortable playing with $1,000. But let's say you have a really good run. You turn your $100 into $1,000, and now you really want to be back at $100, so you want to take the other $900 off. They won't let you. You have to play until you just leave. And in most casinos, they'll require you to be gone for at least an hour before you can come back in and buy in for $100. So that's just the rules. You could take a break anytime. If you're playing cash game, you can get up, go have dinner, come back, and your chips will stay there. Straddles are usually allowed in most casinos, and in fact, in active tables, you'll see a lot of straddling. They do something in cash games, especially at the higher stakes, called running multiple boards out. What does that mean? So say that you're in a cash game, and on the flop, you and another player are all in. You can make a deal to run it twice. And what run it twice means is that you get 2 turns and 2 rivers. So you get a turn river, and then you get another turn and river, and the 2 people in the hand will split. If one wins the top and one wins the bottom, you split it. So it's a way to lower your variance. And the stacks tend to be very large relative to the big blind. By contrast, in tournaments, the chips have no real value. When you enter a tournament, you leave money at the door. Now you have playing chips. And whoever has all the playing chips at the end of the tournament wins the tournament. And you shouldn't think of your chips in a tournament as being money. The blinds will go up regularly. So every 20 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, whatever the time period is for the blinds will continue to go up, which means your stack will go down with respect to how many big blinds you have, right? So if initially, say you have 100 big blinds and then the blinds double, now you have 50 big blinds. And so you're playing shorter and shorter stacked. And the game is on the clock. You have to follow the clock and the rules of the clock. You get assigned a seat in a tournament. So when 40 of you guys play in my house, you're going to walk in the door and pick a seat out of a hat, and that'll tell you what table and what seat. If body odor is sitting next to you, it's tough luck in a tournament. You can't add chips to your stack. You just get the chips and then you play down to a winner, unlike in a cash game where if you want to play deep stack, you just buy more. Usually in a tournament, the top places get paid, like the top 10 or 15%. They'll be in the money. And we're going to look at the different payout structures and how that affects strategy in tournaments. You can only lose your buy-in. In a cash game, it's really dangerous, right? You can keep pulling out more money, losing more money. In a tournament, you buy in for $50. That's what you're putting at risk, is $50. And there are many different formats of tournaments. There's bounties, shootouts, satellites. We're going to talk in the tournaments lecture about all of these different things. So it looks like I got about 3 or 4 minutes. I'm going to go through one more concept. And then we're going to have Danny, for those that want to stay and get a demo of the website that we're going to be using in the class, you can stick for that. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is the rake. If you play in a casino, the way the casino makes money is they rake each pot. That means that they take like 5% of every pot out, up to $5. So if you're playing a 1-3 game, you bet 15, you get a few callers, you end up with a pot of $40, they're going to take 5% of that. That's how the house makes money. And you're going to have to figure that into your calculations later when we figure out some of the math that you need to do. If you play 5-10 or higher, which is quite substantially high, they rake it by time. So every 30 minutes, everybody has to pay a big blind to the house. And that's how they do that. You're also expected to tip the dealer every time you win a hand. And some places take an additional $1 or $2 for their bad beat jackpot and high hand promotion. So bad beat jackpot, in most casinos, if you lose with quads, you actually will win like $20,000. And the reason is they rake $1 out of every pot throughout the course of weeks, and they build up a lot of money, every pot at every table, 24 hours a day. And then they say, we have a bad beat jackpot. If you lose with quads or better, how do you lose with better? Well, you could have the idiot end of a straight flush, and somebody else could have a bigger straight flush. In many casinos, that's awesome because you'll win a ton of money from that. In tournaments, part of the buy-in will go to the house. So if you buy in for a $100 tournament in a casino, they'll take $15 and $85 will go into the prize pool. And then you're also expected to tip. So I've had the good fortune of winning several tournaments, and they come around with their little tip jar. You know you can tip, you know you can tip. So it's not mandatory, but they will let you know that you need to tip. Okay, so I'm going to pick up where I left off here tomorrow. But I do want you all to set up an account. I'm going to post a slide so you'll have that info. And we'll give a break for people to walk out who are leaving, and then Danny's going to come down and do his thing.